Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to another episode of The Ways We Move. This is the podcast that highlights innovative mobility solutions and the people bringing these solutions to us. My name is Nicolas Zart. I am your host today. For those of you who don't know me, I've been around for 20 years, more or less, in the electric mobility industries or innovative mobility industries. And that, of course, includes alternative energy, renewable energy, so on and so forth. And although this podcast, I would like to embrace a lot more with when it comes to electric vehicles, railway, and electric maritime, so far we've been very heavy on this new segment, this new disruptive technology that we call advanced air mobility, which are basically what you might have heard of electric flying cars, air taxis, so on and so forth. So today I am very excited to present yet again someone I think is absolutely terrific, does an amazing job in our industry, especially on the education side of thing. And it is Becky Lutte, or Rebecca Lutte, really. She is a professor at Embry-Riddle, also Embry-Riddle International. And we had a wonderful conversation. We had a great conversation about what is Embry-Riddle doing when it comes to preparing students in aviation for the future of aviation. And of course, that is advanced air mobility. So we talked about a lot of these things. When should we start reaching out to future AAM folks, future aviation aerospace folks? And we concluded something that might not surprise you too much, which I'll let you watch and listen to this podcast to understand. Also, one thing that we highlighted, and this is something that I feel very near and dear to, is the topic of business models. Too many times over the last 20 years of having interviewed some of the best people in our industries, having worked with a lot of these companies, I used to be a journalist and I'm still a consultant, is that I see too many people leaving big companies, Boeing, BMW, GM, Airbus, it doesn't matter, and embrace this new technology using an electric motor to either move a car, move a train or a locomotive, move a boat, or fly an airplane. So they're embracing this disruptive technology, but yet they bring back the same business model that they've run away from because they felt shackled to that. So we will hint on that one. And it's something we really need to change in advanced air mobility. But thankfully, stay tuned because we'll have a few more other people who might give you a little bit of a hint as to what is happening in advanced air mobility. There is a new wave, a sort of an AAM 2.0 wave of companies moving in with a different mindset. And that is the beginning of a smart business model. So without further ado, we'll let Becky introduce herself. And again, like, share, and comment too. That would be very important to us because we want to hear what you would like to hear, what is interesting to you. And maybe also simply enough, we want to know if this helps you understand better what AAM is and how it is part of aviation and how aviation is part of mobility as a whole. It's a whole new philosophical language around that. If you watch our video with Clint Harper, we talked about this evolution and reintegration of mobility as we know it today. But let's hear from Becky first. She will be able to tell us a lot more as far as what we're doing on the education. Again, share, like, and subscribe, and let us know what you think. Thank you. Well, Becky, thank you for being here with us. And please introduce yourself. Who is Becky? What is your background? And what does Becky do?
Sure. Hi. Thank you for having me, first of all. I'm looking forward to this. So I'm Becky Lutte. I am an associate professor and a department chair at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University for our worldwide campus within the College of Aviation. So I've been in higher education for a little while. So gosh, in a variety of different roles for close to 30 years. But really, I started in flight. So that's kind of where my heart is and where the passion for aviation started. So I started out as a professional pilot, and I'm still an active pilot today. So in addition to the degrees that one has for a professor, I've also got a commercial pilot license, instrument rating, multi-engine, CFI, II, MEI, and newly, as of last weekend, seaplane rating. So I'm a big fan of staying very active in general aviation and going out and trying new kinds of training just to build your skill level. So that's where the flying is. And we also are owners of two experimental home built aircraft that were actually built in our garage and are now flying. So that's a little bit about me.
Wow. So yeah, indeed, seaplanes, that's a whole new beast. And I'm very intrigued by seaplanes. I think, especially sea gliders, I think there's such a great future for these guys. And you said something that's very important, by the way. I wish all companies working in aviation had people who were rated to fly airplanes. Wouldn't that be like the first thing you would ever want all of the sea-level suites to do, right? To just be rated to do that, be able to carry 200 people behind you and bring them to safety.
Absolutely.
Tell us about what airplanes are you what experimental airplanes are you building right now? I'm intrigued.
So we actually have two that are done. So we're not building anything at the moment. We've got a break-in project. So the first was an RV7. So the Vans line, I'm a big fan of the Vans
Yeah.
aircraft. There's so many cool kits out there.
Yeah.
Just happened to look into the Vans is where we went. So an RV7, which if you're not familiar, is a 2-seat. It's fully aerobatic. It's got a smoke system. That's kind of the fun one. And then the RV10, which I kind of refer to as a family truckster. So that's a 4-seat
Yes.
single engine, very similar in performance and handling characteristics to a Cirrus. So that's the
Yeah.
comparison.
Yeah, that's actually one of the ones I was thinking about. I live in Savannah, and to go up to Atlanta is not fun. It's 4 hours of driving. To go to Augusta, which is even closer, it's 2.5 hours of back roads. And I'm thinking, you know what? I need something with 4 seats. I have two chocolate labs, and I'd rather all of us be together and just go somewhere. So yeah, I
Perfect.
did look into those guys. That's fantastic. So tell us a little bit more about what you do with Embry-Riddle. I mean, obviously, I think people know Embry-Riddle is one of the biggest schools out there. You're one of the top 2, 3 biggest schools. What do you do exactly over there? What's your day? What does your days look like?
Sure. Well, a couple of things. Well, there's really three things that a professor does, and that's teaching, research, and service. So a lot of teaching, but we also are all, many of us are involved in a lot of research. So my research areas have been varied. So I really enjoy looking at aviation safety. Of course, it's the cornerstone of everything we do. So I'm a policy person. So safety
Yes.
policy, I dabble a little bit in sustainability research, as I call it, as a side gig. But most of what I do is workforce development and looking at, how are we going to attract the talent that we need for the industry. And then in particular, a lot of my research has focused on underrepresented groups, particularly women in aviation. So I had the great fortune of being appointed to the FAA Women in Aviation Advisory
Oh,
Board, which we spent 2 years preparing a report for the FAA in Congress. And then partly as a result of that work and other research, had the opportunity to testify before the House and Senate on the topics of workforce development. So that's kind of the research part of it. But Embry-Riddle as a whole, as you mentioned, we are the worldwide campus. So we are the
yep,
largest by far segment of Embry-Riddle,
that's true.
26,000 plus students strong. All around the world. We are very proud of the fact that we serve a very heavy portion of our students are military. So 48% of our students
True.
are in the military. And our average age student for us in our part of Embry-Riddle is about 32. So we have an opportunity to meet students where they're at in order to let them build their skills and professional development in whatever phase they are in their career, or if they're transitioning from something else into aviation, particularly now, as you know, in the AAM and eVTOL market and UAS. Those are some of our fast growing areas for sure.
So what you're saying is, someone like me who is going to be 60 in a month, I can actually finally get my pilot's license.
Absolutely, never too late.
Never too late. Yeah, and I think I'm actually wise and mature enough now to actually do a good job with it. I haven't owned a, I haven't had a motorcycle technically ever because I thought, I'm a little too crazy. But I think now I can do it now.
Absolutely.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's really good news. So many things you talked about that I want to get into, and of course I'm extending this invitation. You can come back whenever you want because there are so many things we can talk about. Safety, you said it. That's the underlining principle. Anybody who works in aerospace aviation wakes up with safety in mind, goes to sleep with safety in mind. Don't listen to the news. Okay, that's the first thing. But the second thing is mostly, how does safety apply when it comes to advanced air mobility? That would be one thing that we can talk about today. And we can also obviously talk about women in aviation. And I'm going to let you choose which route you want to use today.
Oh, I love talking about both, and I think you almost have to talk about both at the same time,
I think
right?
so too. Yeah, I was hoping you would say that. That's
Yeah.
perfect. That's perfect. Yes. So you may not know this about me, but about 10 years ago, I switched over from the EV industry to what we then call electric air mobility, but to really focus on the infrastructure side of things because we didn't do that when it came to EVs. We focused too much on the vehicles and not enough on the infrastructure. So, strong with the idea that infrastructure can be sexy. Safety came in first and foremost. How do you mix electricity with hydrogen, with sustainable aviation fuels? What does the future of UTM and ATM look like for AAM integrating drones? eVTOLs, eSTOLs, eCTOLs, et cetera, with current traffic. So yeah, definitely safety is something that we need to wrap our heads around. And of course, I think most people know that Part 135 means of mobility on this planet, meaning way safer than your car, guys. But now we're adding an extra layer or extra layers of complexity into all of that. So I'd love to hear your take on what does safety mean going forward.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great point because you just listed out a lot of really key topic areas, right? So the aircraft themselves, what drives the aircraft, battery integration, sustainable fuels, vertiports, infrastructure, and we're going to add a few more, right? So it's also the pilots and the
Absolutely.
pilot training in that unique area. But as a policy person, for sure, how do we approach this from a safety regulatory standpoint? So maintaining training standards in all that we do, and of course, integration. How are we going to
Yeah.
integrate all of these new activities safely into the airspace? So I think that's primary. And to your point, every one of those areas that you listed, when I hear that, I hear workforce. So if you
Yeah,
want a safe
absolutely.
system, you've got to have the properly trained professional workforce doing the job of policy design and airport development and flight training standards and all of those things. So it really comes down to, again, focus on safety is fundamental and having the right people in the right place doing the right job to make sure that we get there.
Yeah, I think you said it very well. Working groups, and I think a lot of people might not, people outside of the industry might not understand what a working group is, but it is a bunch of us passionate people within an industry who come together from various sectors of the industry and work under the umbrella of, so the DOT or the FAA, and both actually have working groups, and these are, or NASA, of course, these are incremental into giving us the stepping stones, the foundations, which then are given back to, well, Congress, FAA, DOT, to eventually become, the certifications that we need to have. And that's very important. I have some of the best times working on work groups because
Exactly.
a human being is an interesting character. Some people show up with some strange motivations, and others are just there to just make it work. So it's always fantastic.
And it's
Tell us a little bit more.
get we make so much more progress on that topic of how do we get there safely when we bring those groups together and have those stakeholder conversations early. You can't forget labor unions. You
Yes.
can't forget, air
No.
traffic controllers and operators and all of those. So who is at the table as we're mapping this pathway to a safer system is really, really key. Yeah, I agree.
You said something that was very interesting, and you're right. About 3 4 years ago, so I've been working with the Augusta Regional Airport because these guys are amazing. They're very open to the future and everything. They were the first ones to bring in the fire department, military, sheriff, and everything to the, and my goodness, the most important person of them all, the fire marshal, because you can design all the vertiports, multiports you want, but if
Great
that fire
point.
marshal is not part of that conversation from the get go, you're looking at easily 50 to $100,000 more because the door is not in the right place, that handle is not in the right place, it's not, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
So
Gosh, that's such a
yes,
great point. Yeah.
and it's like an onion layer. I mean, every time I think I've peeled enough, I'm like, okay, finally the onion. Oh no, there are more
We
layers.
forgot. We forgot this group, and we can't forget the general public either, because if we don't get their buy-in as we're cruising around in various areas, and the more that we can show and express what we've done to create the best possible, safest possible system, the better that conversation is
Yes.
going to go too. So yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it's a multi-layered kaleidoscope
Yes,
point
yes,
of
it
view.
is.
And it's true. Over the last few years, I've been fighting against public acceptance. I'm not begging for acceptance. What is wrong with you? We want desirability. What's not cool about an eVTOL or an eSTOL and eCTOL flying and making it easier for us to fly? And then not too long ago, a friend of mine suggested, well, how did he worded it? But the wow factor.
Yes.
So the public wow factor. I want this. So which for me is a bit like desirability. So I'm glad to hear that. Tell us about, I think one question that comes to mind right now is how, so these working groups are essential. They are what makes our life, the way it is these days. A lot of people come together, put their thoughts together, give us the building blocks. How are the regulatory bodies looking at all of this right now? I know we all have our connections with them, and so far we feel that they've been really good and embracing. But what's your experience with all of that, considering the working groups too?
Yeah, I mean, I think the good news is that everybody recognizes the innovation that's happening in aviation and are excited about the innovation that's happening in aviation. So that's good. I mean, you're not really seeing any pushback in that regard. So everybody is unilaterally on the page of just how do we do it and make it the safest, most possible that we can, and do it in a way that again takes into account all those different stakeholder groups and what they represent.
Yeah. It's a tricky balance. It definitely is a tricky balance, but I think it's true. And I'm also European, so I'm looking at how both are approaching it very different, which is something you guys are probably very familiar with, because if you operate all over the world, you know that, yeah, okay, so EASA and FAA, they pretty much lead the group, but I'm very excited with what the Emirates are doing at the GCAA level, because they're sort of going, we're in the middle. And so these guys are fascinating on top of what China is doing. Yeah, it's an island unto itself, but it's very interesting to see what they're doing. And all of this somehow comes together and everything. Another point that we need to talk about, and this is the white elephant in the room, is why are there so little women in the industry?
Yeah,
Crazy.
that's a good question, and that's one that again, as a part of the FAA Women in Aviation Advisory Board study, we spent a couple of years working on this, and I've done a bit of research in that area. So you're right. I mean, the numbers are not high for women and others in underrepresented groups. 5% professional pilots. Biggest gap in maintenance. 3% maintenance technicians are women.
Yeah, maintenance.
So
Yes,
it's
yes.
a
Yeah.
big gap. And there's not a one perfect answer to your question. What we
No,
found as a board is that it's a series of barriers or challenges that all compound. It's kind of a system approach, if you will. So there's not really one answer as to why, but we
no.
certainly had a lot of recommendations on things like recruitment and advancement. And a lot of it is just starting out in the early stages of how do we get the word out and how do we make more people aware that this is a career opportunity. So, and I think that's really key because, we've all seen the forecast. We've seen the CAE forecast. We've seen the Boeing forecast. And we know what the needs are. And now with the innovative technology, that's even enhanced and even greater, and not just flight, obviously, but the
No.
supporting roles for sure. So the key is how do we get the best possible people in these positions, and in order to do that we've got to look past half the available workforce. So we had some strategies that were in place within that report, but a lot of it really starts with awareness and outreach.
I think you nailed it on the head. Back in time when EVs were, we had actually finally gotten the term right, EVs. One of the first questions we were asking is, where are we going to get the people who repair them? Because, yeah, mechanics, that's one thing, but there's no piston, right? So electricians, and we were sort of looking at that hybrid approach. Well, about a year or two later, we had a bunch of women who would come together to really specifically work on EVs, like EV garages by women, and it was really amazing. These girls were absolutely amazing. And I mean girls because they were young, way younger than me. That's why. But these ladies were absolutely amazing and they did a great job, even like conversions and wow, out of the box thinking. And I'm thinking also a lot of the conversation I had with these ladies, including the ones, by the way, at NASA Ames, as I mentioned right before our conversation here, is there was one fundamental thing that all linked them together. And they all more or less said, I had that one teacher in high school who changed my mind. And it's true. How many times do we have a teacher that turns us off of a topic because, XYZ reasons? But how many times do we have a teacher that really gets us excited about a topic?
Yes.
And I wonder, I mean, wouldn't it be a good idea to also start working with high schools, to start working with these earlier stages, 12 to 17, when our minds are wondering, what the heck are we going to do in life? Is that something you guys are even thinking or considering?
Yeah, that is spot on, exactly right. So the research, now here I go. The research tells you that the key age to get somebody hooked in is 10 and under. And then
Yep.
you have to sustain that momentum, right? But also
Yes.
one of the surveys that I did of women in aviation, there was one really surprising data point that came out of that survey. And that was that it was looking at who is an influencer, to your point, teacher,
Yeah.
parent,
Good
counselor.
point. Good point.
And what the survey showed was that high school counselors actually were rarely an influencer on getting young women into aviation. And when they were, it was more negative than positive. So it tended to turn them away. And that problem is on us. That is not a hit on high school counselors. They have a lot of work to do.
No,
It
they
is
have a
on
lot of work.
us. And to your
Yeah.
point, it's the industry needs to inform those influencers, teachers, counselors, parents. These are the opportunity. I mean, how many teachers do you think know what's happening in the world of AAM in aviation? So it's really on us to do that. So out of our board, and then at the same time, there was a youth in aviation task force happening, and both the Women in Aviation Board and the Youth in Aviation Task Force, we had a lot of simultaneously synergistic recommendations, and a lot of that was get in the high schools,
Yes.
influence the influencers or inform the influencers so that they know if somebody comes up to them and says, I'm interested, we have answers. So getting a place where they can go to get that knowledge is key. So we at Embry-Riddle, of course, we do a lot of high school outreach. We actually have dual credit
Good.
programs so that you can take those high school classes and come to us with several credit hours under your belt, which is also a more
Oh,
economical way to do it. And that's, like we said, that's the key. Get them hooked about 10 and under with programs like Girls in Aviation Day, EAA Young
yep.
Eagles. There's a ton of AOPA's got some great high school programs
Yes.
out there, and then keep that momentum going to draw them into the industry. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think you have to reach early, and that's usually that when they get all excited and everything. I wish I would have known that before. My life would have been very different by now. Love
Exactly.
what I'm doing, but yeah, exactly. That's
And
that's that's very important.
I wanted to come back to a point you made about maintenance. And it was interesting. I was at a Girls in Aviation Day a few years back, right? And I'm biased. I'm a pilot. We feel like pilot is the draw, right? And actually, the research does show that the cool factor is what draws people in, obviously. But
Yep.
I was at this Girls in Aviation Day, and one of the local aviation maintenance program schools had come in with a Lycoming on a stand and three women, 18 to 20, that were students in the program that had the polos for the school, and they were talking about the engine, and the fact that it was there on the stand and the people could look at it. Usually the girls are crowded around the pilots. The girls swarmed to that line coming and those women, and were just fascinated by it. And I thought, what a genius way to get, it's the hands-on, got to see it to
Yes.
be it, all of those things. But I have very little doubt that very few of those young girls realized that was an opportunity before that moment.
No, I think you're right. And now that I look back, my own experience too, especially also in the EV industry, is the designing, ergonomics, and everything. Usually, women sort of gravitate towards that. But you're right on the mechanical side of things. Now, here's one thing: imagine if women were involved in the conceptualization of engines and anything in general. How much easier it would be to repair, guys? How many times do you have to go under the car just to do something so simple that you could just do like this, right? That's the challenge I'd love to put out there, because that was the one thing I've noticed is that men tend to be very linear but not very practical. Women are way more practical when it comes to designing, putting things in the right place. And I know my wife is always after me and going, "Why do you put that there?" It was like, I don't know, I just can't explain it.
Well, and to your
And
point,
I know
as you just said, though, really, that's a good example of the fact that it's a matter of having that mix, right? So the whole point is having
exactly
the
that was the point.
blend of different perspectives and viewpoints, which not only makes you more operationally efficient, we know from research, but it also increases safety because you're looking at everything through a different lens. You're identifying risk differently. You're avoiding groupthink. All of those things. So you're spot on.
No, it's a sticking point, and you're right, because the projects that actually lead to something in my life, the most concrete projects I lead with, is when we work half and half women, half man. And I'm working right now on something it's fantastic. I never have to think about what they're doing. I know they're doing it. And they're also pushing me, to better myself. But when I work in a men-only environment, yeah, we've got 30,000 ideas and all, and there's almost no traction. It drives me nuts. I want to find that right balance. And of course, to this point, wouldn't it be great if women had access to the higher C levels, to the higher board levels, and have a final say in it all? I think we definitely would see a very different world. Well, obviously we would.
And we're seeing some improvement in that area for sure. I mean,
Absolutely.
overall, we've gone from about 3% women in the C-suite level roles, and that's creeping up to about
Yep.
5 to 6%. So that is increasing, and that changes a lot of other factors that impact your workforce, and drawing in things like corporate policies and a lot of other things that we looked at in the Women in Aviation study. But so yes, you're right. That's a factor as well.
And I really hope that somewhere along the lines, advanced air mobility will be something that will entice these young women to get excited about it. Have a say in the future, for crying out loud. This is something that we're building. If in 10 years we went from a very quaint notion of hopping from building top to building tops, eventually landing on a parking lot. Today, it's way more robust than that. But have your say in it. I mean, it's important to know what you think and how you see it too. And I well, and this is why we have this segment, women in mobility. How are you guys also pushing the needle forward? And I don't mean you guys as a difference. And I'm not talking about barriers, but it's good to have, like you say, this mix of different ways of looking at things.
Yeah, and AAM in general and eVTOL and all the innovation, again, the research is showing us that what draws people in is that cool factor. And not everybody's
Yes.
going to be a pilot. And quite frankly, not everybody's going to be able to afford that pathway. But if they get drawn in, then they're going to find out there's a whole abundance of, a wide range of opportunities within the field. So one of the things that, in addition to obviously just being an aviation geek and loving the innovation that we're seeing, it's also that, to me, opens up a huge recruiting workforce development tool
Yes.
for us to say, look at this cool factor, look at AAM, look at boom supersonic, look at all the things that are happening in aviation, and using that to help get the word out about what's happening, and draw all youth from all aspects into aviation.
You said something that's very important in our industry, and that hinges on the automation of our industry. And that, yeah, you're right. In the past, it was the coolest thing ever to be a pilot. One of my close friend flies a Gulfstream 650 ER. He hates it. He doesn't want to fly it anymore. And I said, "Are you kidding me?" He goes, "No, seriously, I push buttons. My insurance forbids me to hand fly this airplane." And I thought, oh. So yeah, you're right. The cool factor about being a pilot, I think, you can always have your own airplane. I'll always have my own Alfa Romeos in my garage. That's what I love. It's
I love
fine.
it.
But I want a lucid air. Absolutely. I want it to be autonomous. Absolutely. I have no problem with that. It's part of life. And it's the same thing with an airplane. I want to have an airplane I can really feel and get my sensation. And I'm a drummer, so I know how to use all four, extremities in different ways too. That's not a problem. But I don't think the big draw for AAM going forward is going to be the pilot. I mean, and you've probably have done the same simulators I've done. You have an envelope, you're in there, you can push all you want, you're not going in that direction. So that's I think it's going to be a lesser role. And you think that you're right, the wow factor is probably going to attract a lot of women to work on battery management systems, maybe even the energy side of things. And then we need a lot of creative thinking. How are we going to push megawatts into these aircraft too? So we need a lot of creative thinking around that. And I think women are perfect for that too, or at least it's needed in that world.
Yeah, yeah, and I do, and I do think it's a lot of fun to fly, though. I have to say, from the small window I had in the Joby simulator,
Yeah.
that did it for me. I was ready. Sign me up. This is another fun thing I want to fly. But yes, again, it's that wide range of careers that this opens up for everybody. And one of the areas, again, that I find really fascinating is going back to the safety professionals that we're going to need, that
Yes.
understand this segment of the market, and then those policy folks. Whether that's FAA or DOT or even in-house regulatory compliance people, all of that,
Yes.
that are
Yeah.
going to understand and like working towards this idea of how do we establish policy to seamlessly and clearly as safely as possible integrate all this into the system.
Yeah, and that's going to be the fun part. So here's a question for you. How are, I mean, education systems like yours looking at advanced air mobility? In other words, I'm sure 15 years ago it probably existed or was an embryo. How is it looking like today? How do you articulate AAM into your overall curriculum
Yeah,
or
that's a great question.
curricula? The plural of curriculum.
That's a great question. And, when we talk about innovation in aviation and we talk about all these different areas, I always come back to that from the lens of, okay, now where is that innovation in higher education? What are we
Yes.
doing in terms of how we deliver education that's keeping up? Not just in content, but in how. like literally how we're
Yes.
providing that education.
Thank you.
So at Embry-Riddle Worldwide, we're online. So we're delivering that education remotely and in a variety of formats. So we use online simulations that students can log on to and all those different kinds of things. We're presenting workforce education in a whole different way. We've got skill bridge programs for people coming transitioning out of the military who maybe don't have any aviation experience to gaining
Wow.
aviation experience through our programs in partnership with maintenance organizations. That is something that maybe that gets expanded into this world. So there's a lot of different things. And AAM itself, in terms of the content of the courses, what's really important for us, it's critical, is that we stay very engaged with industry. So we have
Yeah.
industry advisory boards. We have to keep up. I'm not the subject matter expert by far, you and many others, but we know where they are and we need to keep in communication because we need to know what you need so that they are day one ready when they walk across the stage to be a contributing member of that workforce group in aviation. So that takes a lot of back and forth and us keeping current and then going back and modifying our course curriculum, right down into the learning outcome level to make sure that, we're preparing people in the right way.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I think one thing you said really like just God, I felt the passion in that one, the bridge, because it's true. A lot of military folks get out of the military and don't automatically find civilian solutions because they have a military training, which doesn't always equate to that. So having a bridge for these guys is absolutely phenomenal. I like that idea a lot. Another thing too that I was thinking might appeal to your philosophical aspect is so I've been in these industries for 20 years, and I'm always impressed at the kind of person it takes to walk away from BMW, Boeing, Airbus, whatever you want, and to want to do something totally new because they couldn't do it over there. Adopt a sort of a paradigm of a technology, but unfortunately bringing in the old antiquated business models that they work well for these big companies, but in a startup world, no, no, no. So how do you guys see this? Because I think there's it's one thing to train people to understand how an electric motor works, how airplanes fly and everything, but the business context, I think it's still the weakest point that we have in any disruptive technologies is what is the business model? What is the business logic around that? And I'm about to write a book, by the way, on why startups fail with a few friends of mine, because we've noticed that fundamentally it's always the same thing. You have a great idea. You're an entrepreneur. You're not a good executive, by the way. Remember that, right? I mean, not everybody is Steve Jobs, right? No problem. But how do you create that mentality where, hey, it's a new technology, it needs a new business model? Is that something you guys are thinking about?
Yeah, I love this conversation. This is really interesting because you're right. And I mean, again, that's where innovation happens is in the startup.
Yeah, exactly.
And as we know, they're not all successful and some will fail and some will merge. And we're seeing a lot of that in this segment right now. So I think you're exactly right. I mean, you can teach the textbook, nuts and
Yeah.
bolts and how to do it, but that business sense I think is really important. So we do. I mean, we've got, of course, minors and courses and all of that in the actual business management structure of it. So certainly we provide that as part of the coursework. But I think that's interesting because now you have me thinking. See, this is why I said industry contact is so important to go back and look from. I need to see if we specifically do that in a startup perspective because I work with several people, several from the FAA board, in fact, who had gone with multiple different startups and worked through
Yes.
two or three different startups, and that was kind of their thing,
Yes.
was they really liked the energy and the excitement of getting something literally off the ground and then moving on and doing that again with another startup. So there's definitely some opportunity, I think, to look at that. So I'm really glad you brought that up because I'm actually going to go back and look into that myself and make sure we've got that angle covered. That's really good.
I'll work with you on that one because it's something that I've noticed. It's something that's very near and dear to me. Also, because I'm a professionally trained business coach, I actually, did a whole thing and everything. And it's true that entrepreneurs, they're good at ideas. They're not always good at executing things. But yeah, for me, it was always that why are you doing marketing like this? You should be doing communications first. Just very basic things like that. And that's something that I've always think it's the missing there's a secret ingredient to a startup, and it's not that difficult, but it's a lot of mental gymnastics, and it means a fundamentally redesigned business model that's adapted to what you're trying to do, which is not common sense after all, kind of thing, to be followed up on.
And it's not always where people want to spend their time. The people that like
No,
some parts of it don't want to spend their time in that aspect of it. And that's okay. You need to recognize that, play to your strengths, but make sure you've got that base covered somewhere. So
that's
yeah, we
yeah.
could have some interesting conversations on that for sure.
Yeah, it's one of the basic tenets. You have to surround yourself with the right people, not the yes people, but the right kind of people, and that's very, very difficult, especially when you start to choose things that are a little bit more like on the financial side of things, on the law side of things. You need to you have people who also are creative, futurists. I mean, it's tricky, but for sure. But guess what? Boeing was a startup at one point. IBM was a startup at one point. So you got to start somewhere, and if you don't do it, somebody else will do it. So jump in there and do it. Well, Becky, I've really enjoyed everything we've talked about. So we're coming towards the end of it, and towards the end of it, I want to get more into the personal side of things. I want to find out what is Becky's motivation. What gets Becky out of bed in the morning, and you exude passion. Obviously, that's very obvious. But I want to know, what is your motivation? I mean, some people are happy working at a bank and call it a day, get a mortgage, get another car, and go on vacation, and that's about it. And then there are people like you.
The field is, everybody's got this shared passion for aviation, right? And that's what
Yes.
one of the things that's a really big driving factor. I mean, I go to Oshkosh every year, and I go to Women in Aviation, and I go to all these different things,
Yes.
and it's just that energy is just so great. So what drives me? I think it's really a couple of things. One is, obviously, as an educator, I'm a big fan of lifelong learning. I don't know. I mean, this field is just, you have to be a lifelong learner. There's so many opportunities. We just talked about, adding new kinds of flight training that'll teach you all new skills. And, all of that always exists. Now I'm already looking at what I'm going to fly next so I can build out something new. But also from the research perspective and the teaching perspective, the classes never stay the same. It's always, you're keeping that curriculum up. So the learning aspect, but without a doubt, as cliche as it sounds, it's the people. So the
Yep.
community of people that love
Yep.
aviation, and again,
Yep.
adding on, some new flight training recently, one of the things that was an unintended fantastic consequence was there's a whole new community of people out there in aviation that I hadn't been a part of yet. And that gave me an opportunity to
Yes.
do that. So every
Yes.
time, you get that opportunity just to be a part of people that have the shared passion, it's just invigorating.
It's true, and I think you're right. I think the first time I went to Oshkosh, I had seen it, I had watched the videos and pictures, but man, when you're in there, you feel like you're coming home to your family. Like, oh,
Exactly.
you've got the disease too, do you? Right?
You
And
people
it's
get
like,
me.
yeah, you get it, right? And it's such a primal human experience to fly, right? It's one of the first thing we want to do is, untangle ourselves from the heaviness of gravity and everything. And it speaks at so many different layers. And I like what you said also about seaplanes, because that was actually the last time I went to see seaplanes, and it was at Oshkosh actually. And then we went to their little
The base.
uh, yeah, the little sea base, and it was a community within a community.
Exactly.
And man, these guys were addicts, and they were no beyond addicts. They were, I don't know even know, I don't even know what the word is for these guys, but they were so into what they were saying and doing and everything, and the nuts and bolts and everything, even worse than we are on our side. And I was just like the passionate side of me was going, but a bump, but a bump, but a bump. I want it, I want it, I want it. I was like, whoa, come down, come down. First get your
You can get
license,
it.
okay? Yeah, first get your normal license and then go after that. But yeah, it's true. It's definitely yeah, it's an old passion, and it just bites you. And it's like yeah, I'm an Alfa Romeo collector, and it's like it's a disease, it's a virus, and there's no antivirus, thank goodness.
Yes. So, and if we have a moment, I didn't
Please do
ask
so.
you. So,
Yeah,
how did you get the bug originally? I'm always fascinated to know how people originally got into
I
aviation.
was 2.5 week old. So my father was flying, so this was in the south of France. He was flying a French airplane called a Mousquetaire. And this is this is back in the mid 60s, right? So there might have been seat belts. I'm not really sure. But anyway, so he was flying, and I was on my mom's lap. Of course, I don't remember, but I was told that I was very disturbed seeing the yoke move without any hands on it. So I didn't particularly enjoy it, but I have to tell you, I'm the guy who will, do the Russian mountain rides and things like that. I'm the guy who will sit on the wing part of the section of an airplane to go talk to the captain after that, saying, "That's really interesting. I saw you did blah, 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 blah." I would much rather be in the nose or in the tail because I like those heavy feelings and sensations. But yeah, that was the bug. I was on a skateboard up until maybe 5 years ago when I dislocated everything. So, I love, I'm an adrenaline junkie to say the least. Everybody is like, "You sure you want to fly with me? You're not scared?" I'm like, "Oh, I just hope there are pockets of air all the time, my friend." And when people fly next to me, I'm like, "Oh, you're in the safest place. Let me tell you why."
I
That's
love
my
it.
passion. That's my
I love
passion.
it. That's fantastic.
So
That
yeah.
might be the earliest story I've ever heard, I have to say, at 2.5 weeks.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, I think it was. It was pretty early, but yeah, it was
That's
always part
great.
of my life. And then I grew up with old cars, so I mean, everything, that whole pioneering feeling was always there. Yeah, it was always part of my life. That's for sure. And as closing statements, and by the way, you will come back, right? It's not
I'd
just
be
an
happy to.
invitation.
Yeah,
I'm forcing you to come back.
absolutely. I love
What
it.
would you like our listeners and watchers to walk away from with today's meeting? What is the one thing you want them to understand, or the message you want to get through?
I think just being aware of the many, many, many opportunities in aviation, that there's always something there for anybody that wants to be a part of it. And even more exciting, maybe for those of us that are already in it, there's always something new to go check out and explore. And, certainly don't be afraid to get out there and look into a whole new segment of aviation and what it may have for you. So I would say that.
That's very well said. You're right. It's a universe, and there are lots of little pathways you can take. You can switch and jump around. And yes, we need more people coming into this industry. That's for sure. Absolutely. Fantastic. Well, Becky, it's such a pleasure to have you here. I look forward to our next recordings. And for our listeners and watchers out there, let us know what you think. Let us know if you learn anything new, if your mind has changed around what is advanced air mobility. Of course, like, share, subscribe, and put your comments in there. We'd like to know what you guys think and what you guys want to hear about. And in the meantime, I'm thanking Becky for coming to be with us today, and hope to see you very soon again.
Thank you for having me. I had a lot of fun.
Thank you.